Hey everybody, this is Adam from RPG Site, and today I'm looking at a newly released mobile game from Square Enix known as Adventures of Mana. And this Adventures of Mana is a remake of the original Mana game. In Japan, this series is not known as Mana, but it's known as Seiken Densetsu. And the original game released on the Game Boy way back in something like 1990 or 1991. When this game released in North America, it was known as Final Fantasy Adventure, and when this original game released in Europe, it was known as Mystic Quest, not to be confused with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is something else entirely. But anyway, the Mana series from Square, it's an action RPG series, and the early titles in it are most easily compared to something like the old 2D Zelda games, where you have this 2D large world map separated into various squares, various sections of the map, and then you move your character through this sprawling overworld, section by section, navigating through these various monsters and various enemies. And unlike Zelda, Final Fantasy Adventure put more focus on this combat and exploration and gaining new weapons and things like that, whereas Zelda put more emphasis on the puzzles and the dungeons and those sorts of things. So, the Mana series, or the Seiken Densetsu series, it's remained an action RPG series and kind of evolved as it progressed, coming with games like Secret of Mana and Legend of Mana and on from there. The original game was remade earlier as well with a Game Boy Advance game called Sword of Mana, but that remake wasn't very faithful to the original. It embellished on a lot of things with the story, adding new elements to the characters and to the villains, and it was kind of just a strange remake, although it wasn't a bad game in of itself. There's also new things like crafting and side quests and things like that, so it was a reimagining of the original game. Now, Adventures of Mana here is about as faithful to the original Seiken Densetsu or Final Fantasy Adventure as you can get. Literally, it's about a one-to-one remake of that game. The maps are the same. The bushes are in the same spot. All the dungeons are laid out in the exact same way. You get the items in the same places. The only thing that's new here is the art style, of course. The dialogue, now that they don't have to worry about character limits and things like that, it's been polished up quite a bit, but it still remains as simple as it ever was. If it wasn't in the original game, you're not going to find it in Adventures of Mana here. And of course the music has also been repolished up as well, sounding for the most part as good as it could be, as we can expect on mobile devices here. And when I say that this is a one-to-one recreation of the original series, the original game, it warts and all. In the original title, you had to worry about making sure you had enough key rings and mattocks, it's like a pickaxe, in your inventory, else you might get stuck in a dungeon at places if you didn't have enough, and you'd have to either find a key or a mattock or go back to the shop and buy one. And there's also inventory limits still in place where you can only hold so many items before you have to organize or use them or drop them or whatever. It's like I said, this game is about as faithful as you can be, almost to a fault, to the original game. In that it still feels like a Game Boy game, and that's also true for how the enemies behave in the title, where they just kind of, for the most part, wander around their screens, kind of randomly attacking in various directions, hoping that they might hit your character here and there, just like you would expect from an old Zelda game. The enemies just have these attacks. They're not very smart, and you just kind of have to figure out their patterns and how to get around them. And so it's not a very difficult game in that regard. Now, Adventures of Mana is a mobile game, and I played it on my Android phone with the touchscreen controls, and I thought it worked pretty well for the most part. It takes a little bit of getting used to. There are a couple of different options for the virtual D-pad in terms of its sensitivity and how far you have to slide to move and things like that. And I think it works okay. Not as good as it could be. Certainly doesn't beat a D-pad or anything like that. It does support, the Android version anyway, does support controllers, so you can use a controller if you would like. in Japan, Adventures of Mana did release on PlayStation Vita as well as mobile devices, although it hasn't been released in English on PlayStation yet. Square Enix Europe did acknowledge that some fans are hoping that we do get the Vita version, so maybe they are considering it at this point. And I would definitely recommend that version if this is a game that interests you. So, in the end, Adventures of Mana, it's basically Final Fantasy Adventure on your phone. Basically, just as it was on the Game Boy, 25 years ago. Just it's prettier. The art style isn't the in-game art style may not be fantastic. It's not sprites. It's got the 3D models that you can see, of course, and with the polished up music and things like that, it works well enough. But it's still a Game Boy game at heart, in terms of its design, its challenge, and the structure and everything about it, really. So it's a comfortable experience. It took me about 10 hours or so to clear it. So if you're looking and I think for a mobile game, for a remake like that, I think that's about as satisfactory as you can get here with something like a remake of the original. And so there are a few places where there are a couple of design decisions from the first game that transferred over directly that are a little bit questionable. For example, sometimes you need a certain enemy to spawn in a certain room so that you can use it to unlock the next room. Specifically, you turn them into a snowman with the ice spell and push them on a block, and that's your puzzle. But only certain enemies can be turned into ice, and which enemies spawn in the room is random, so you kind of just have to hope that the enemies that show up are the ones you need. Otherwise, you kind of have to cycle in and out waiting for the right spawn. So, as I said, this is basically the same Final Fantasy adventure that it's always been, with better music, better dialogue, and all the same oddities that the original had as well. So, I'll be writing a review on the site, just a couple of these points written out. Otherwise, it's available on iOS and Android, and maybe on the Vita soon enough here, if Square decides to port the English version. Anyways, thanks for watching. Check us out on RPG Site, at our Twitter, twitter.com/RPG Site, and we'll see you later.